Black architect turns historic building into cultural hub. Community cheers. The wrecking ball swung toward the crumbling facade of the Harrington building, its pendulous weight casting a shadow over the crowd gathered below. Marcus Johnson, 65 years old with salt and pepper hair and determination etched into the lines of his face, stood directly in its path, arms outstretched as if he could physically hold back progress with nothing but will. "Stop!" Marcus shouted, his voice cracking with emotion. "This building isn't just brick and mortar, it's our history." Behind him, nearly 200 community members linked arms, creating a human chain around the perimeter of the century-old structure. Their chants rose in unified defiance against the demolition crew. Police officers shifted uncomfortably, unsure whether to intervene. The construction foreman shouted into his radio while glaring at the unexpected resistance. Standing across the street, Victoria Pierce, the architect whose design was supposed to replace this eyesore with luxury condominiums, clutched her portfolio to her chest. Her carefully crafted plans, the ones that had finally earned her partner status at Reynolds and Associates, were literally crumbling before her eyes. "Ms. Pierce," her assistant whispered urgently, "Mr. Reynolds is on the phone. He's furious. He says if you can't handle this situation immediately, the promotion is off the table." Victoria's phone buzzed with incoming calls from investors, each one representing millions of dollars now in jeopardy. Through the chaos, her eyes locked with Marcus's across the divide, his filled with righteous passion, hers with professional panic. Between them hung the question of what truly constituted progress and at what cost it should come. But let's go back to how this all started. It was just 3 hours earlier when Victoria pulled up to the Harrington building for what should have been a routine pre-demolition walkthrough. The morning had dawned crisp and clear, full of promise. Victoria Pierce straightened her tailored blazer before stepping out of her Tesla. At 42, she had finally reached the precipice of everything she'd worked toward. Partner at Reynolds and Associates, one of the most prestigious architectural firms in the city. Today was meant to be a formality, one last inspection before the old Harrington building came down tomorrow, making way for her visionary design of luxury condominiums. "Morning, Miss Pierce," called Derek, her assistant, hurrying across the street with 2 coffee cups. "Thought you might need this. It's going to be a long day." Victoria accepted the coffee with a grateful nod. "Thanks. Let's make it a quick walkthrough. I have a meeting with the investors at 11. The Harrington building loomed before them, its red brick facade dulled by decades of neglect. Built in 1924, it had once been the heart of Westside, housing the neighborhood's first black-owned businesses during an era of segregation. But that was ancient history as far as the City Planning Commission was concerned. Now it was just prime real estate in an up-and-coming neighborhood. "This place gives me the creeps," Derek said, eyeing the boarded-up windows. "Like it's watching us or something." Victoria rolled her eyes. "It's just a building, Derek, bricks and mortar, nothing more." She inserted the key into the padlock securing the chain-link fence. As they stepped onto the property, a voice called out from across the street. "Excuse me, you with the building?" Victoria turned to see an older black man approaching, leaning slightly on a wooden cane. He wore pressed khaki pants and a button-down shirt despite the early hour and summer heat. "Marcus Johnson," he introduced himself, extending a weathered hand. "I live just down the block, been here 47 years. Victoria shook his hand politely but firmly. "Victoria Pierce, Reynolds and Associates. I'm the architect for the new development." Marcus's smile didn't waver, but something in his eyes shifted. "Mind if I join you? I've always had a fondness for this old place." Victoria hesitated. The walkthrough was a formality, but it was also private property now. Still, there was something dignified about Marcus that made refusal feel unnecessarily harsh. "I suppose it's all right, Mr. Johnson, but we can't stay long. I have appointments." "Appreciate it," Marcus said, following them through the gate. "And please call me Marcus." Inside, sunlight streamed through gaps in the boarded windows, illuminating dancing dust particles and creating spotlight effects on the worn wooden floors. Victoria consulted her checklist while Derek snapped verification photos for their records. "They built this place to last," Marcus commented, running his hand along a solid oak banister. "Hand-carved, you don't see craftsmanship like this anymore." Victoria made a noncommittal noise, focusing on her checklist. "The structural assessment is complete. We're just confirming there are no outstanding issues before demolition tomorrow." Marcus paused, his hand still on the banister. "Tomorrow. I thought the community meeting wasn't until next week." "That meeting is just informational," Victoria explained, not looking up from her tablet. "The demolition permits were approved last month. Without public input." Now Victoria did look up, noting the change in Marcus's tone. There was a notice in the paper and on the city website. All proper channels were followed. Marcus frowned, looking around the vast, empty room that had once been the main floor. Not everyone reads the paper these days, and plenty of folks around here don't have internet. Seems like they should have had a say. Victoria sighed inwardly. She'd encountered neighborhood resistance before. It was an unfortunate but common part of urban development. Mr. Johnson, Marcus, I understand your attachment, but this building has been condemned. It's structurally unsound and a safety hazard. Is it? Marcus challenged gently. Or is it just inconvenient for someone's bottom line? Before Victoria could respond, Derek called from across the room. Ms. Pierce, you should see this. They walked over to where Derek stood, pointing at a section of wall where boards had been removed from a window. Beneath years of grime and peeling paint was a mural, faded but still visible. It depicted a vibrant street scene of black business owners, customers, and community members outside this very building. That's Samuel Harrington himself, Marcus said, pointing to a figure in the center. He built this place when no bank would give loans to black business owners. This was the first place in the city where our community could shop with dignity, open accounts, see black doctors and lawyers. Victoria studied the mural, unexpectedly moved by the proud faces looking back at her across time. I had no idea. It wasn't in any of the historical assessments. Official history has a way of overlooking certain people's stories, Marcus replied. Come with me, there's more you should see. Against her better judgment and schedule, Victoria followed Marcus deeper into the building. He moved with surprising agility for his age, leading them up the grand staircase to the second floor. My father had his accounting practice in this room right here, Marcus said, pushing open a door. He helped half the neighborhood manage their money, apply for loans they'd get denied for elsewhere. When he passed in '84, there were so many people at his funeral they had to hold it in the street. Room by room, Marcus revealed the building's hidden history, the medical clinic that served those turned away from segregated hospitals, the community meeting space where civil rights strategies were planned, the small theater where local musicians played. And right up here, Marcus said, leading them to the third floor, was the neighborhood's first library. White libraries wouldn't let us in, so Samuel Harrington built his own and filled it with books. The large room still had built-in shelves lining the walls, though they stood empty now. Ornate moldings framed tall windows that would have bathed readers in natural light. Victoria found herself seeing the building through new eyes. Where before she'd noted only code violations and demolition logistics, now she saw the shadows of a vibrant past, of lives and dreams contained within these walls. It's remarkable history, she acknowledged, but the building is still unsafe. The foundation is compromised, the wiring needs a complete overhaul, so fix it, Marcus interrupted. Instead of tearing down our history to build luxury condos nobody from around here can afford, why not restore it, make it serve the community again? Victoria shook her head. That's not the project I was hired for. The investors want. I know what investors want, Marcus cut in, his voice gentle but firm. I used to be one. Before I retired, I ran a successful construction company, built half the shopping centers in this city. I understand business, Ms. Pierce, but I also understand legacy. An uncomfortable silence fell between them. Victoria's phone buzzed, a reminder for her 11 o'clock meeting. I appreciate the tour, Marcus, truly, but I need to go. The demolition is scheduled for tomorrow morning at 9. Marcus nodded slowly. Thank you for listening, at least. That's more than most developers do. As they headed back downstairs, Victoria's mind raced. The mural alone could be considered historically significant. Perhaps there should be some kind of preservation effort, at least to document these stories before the building came down. At the entrance, Marcus paused. You know, my daughter always used to say we don't just need to fight against things, we need to build something better. She's an urban planner now, working with communities like this all over the country. She sounds impressive, Victoria said sincerely. Oh, she is, learned from her mother, smartest woman I ever knew. His expression softened at the memory. She passed 10 years ago, cancer. I'm sorry. Life happens to us all, Marcus said philosophically. But buildings like this, they can outlive us if we let them. They can tell our stories when we're gone. Victoria felt a twinge of something unfamiliar, doubt, perhaps, or the first stirrings of an idea she wasn't ready to acknowledge. I really do have to go, Marcus. Of course, thank you for your time. As Victoria and Derek walked back to her car, she found herself glancing back at the building, seeing it with new awareness. He was quite the tour guide, Derek commented. Never knew that old place had such history. Neither did I, Victoria admitted. She checked her watch. We're going to be late, let's hurry. But as they drove away, the images stayed with her. The mural, the grand staircase, Marcus's stories of a community finding ways to thrive against all odds. Victoria had built her career on creating beautiful, modern spaces, yet she'd never before considered what might be lost in the process. At the office, Victoria barely had time to collect her presentation materials before heading into the conference room where James Reynolds and the investment team were already waiting. "There she is," Reynolds said with a tight smile. "Our star architect finally joining us." Victoria apologized for her tardiness and launched into her presentation, displaying renderings of the luxury condominium complex that would replace the Harrington building. 8 stories of sleek glass and steel, with rooftop gardens and a pool. Ground-floor retail spaces for upscale boutiques and restaurants. "The demolition begins tomorrow," she explained, "and we anticipate construction will take approximately 14 months. Units are already being pre-sold based on the renderings, with 60% of the luxury tier already claimed." The investors nodded approvingly. Reynolds beamed at her from the head of the table. "Any unexpected issues during your final walkthrough?" one investor asked. Victoria hesitated. "Actually, I discovered some potentially significant historical elements, a mural depicting the building's original purpose as a hub for Black-owned businesses in the 1920s. It might be worth documenting before demolition." Reynolds's smile faltered. "Is this going to delay our timeline?" "No, I'm just suggesting we photograph it for the historical record. Perhaps include a small display in the lobby of the new building, acknowledging what stood there before." "A plaque," Reynolds said dismissively. "Fine if it makes the transition smoother, just make sure it doesn't impact the schedule." The meeting continued, but Victoria found her thoughts drifting back to the Harrington building, to Marcus's stories and the legacy contained within those walls. Her carefully crafted design suddenly felt hollow, disconnected from the community it would supposedly improve. After the meeting, Reynolds pulled her aside. "Good work in there. The investors are pleased. Once this project is complete, the partnership is yours." Victoria nodded, the words she'd longed to hear for years somehow less satisfying than expected. "Thank you, James. Just keep things on track, no delays." As Reynolds walked away, Victoria's phone rang. It was an unknown number. "Victoria Pierce speaking." "Ms. Pierce, this is Diana Johnson. I believe you met my father this morning." Victoria recalled Marcus mentioning his daughter, the urban planner. "Yes, he gave me quite the history lesson about the Harrington building. That's why I'm calling. My father told me about your visit, and I wondered if we might meet to discuss alternatives to demolition." Victoria's immediate instinct was to refuse. The plans were set, permits obtained, contracts signed, yet something made her hesitate. "I don't know what alternatives there could be at this point," she said carefully. "Just one conversation," Diana pressed. "I've helped revitalize historical structures in 5 different cities. There are grants, tax incentives, community investment options that could make restoration more profitable than demolition. I can show you the numbers." Victoria checked her watch. She had a free hour before her next meeting. "Where are you now?" "At my father's house, just a few blocks from the Harrington building." Victoria made a decision. "Text me the address. I'll be there in 20 minutes. Diana Johnson answered the door before Victoria could knock. She was perhaps mid-30s, with her father's same warm brown eyes and confidence. "Thank you for coming," Diana said, ushering her inside. "Dad's in the kitchen making coffee." The Johnson home was modest but immaculately kept, with books lining every available shelf and framed family photos covering the walls. In many of them, Victoria recognized a smiling woman who must have been Marcus's late wife. Marcus greeted her from the kitchen. "Ms. Pierce, this is unexpected. Coffee." "Please," Victoria said, taking a seat at the dining table where Diana had spread out documents, blueprints, and financial projections. "I've been studying the Harrington building for years," Diana explained. "It's part of a broader research project on historically significant Black architectural spaces and their role in community resilience." She showed Victoria structural assessments that contradicted the ones Victoria's firm had commissioned, suggesting the building was far more salvageable than previously claimed. Then came financial models showing how historical preservation tax credits, combined with community investment and grants, could make restoration financially viable. "The real innovation," Diana continued, "is the mixed-use model. The ground floor becomes affordable retail spaces for local entrepreneurs. The second floor, community services, health clinic, legal aid, career development. Third floor, a combination of cultural space and education center." Victoria studied the plans, impressed despite herself. "And who pays for all this?" "That's where this comes in," Marcus said, setting down coffee cups and joining them at the table. He slid a folder toward Victoria. The Westside Community Trust. We've been pooling resources for years, waiting for the right project. Inside the folder were bank statements showing nearly $2 million in available funds, along with pledge commitments from local businesses, churches, and individuals totaling another $3 million. It's not enough for the entire renovation, Diana acknowledged, but combined with historical grants and tax incentives, it covers the gap between what's profitable for investors and what's beneficial for the community. Victoria's mind raced, calculating figures and possibilities. Even if the numbers work, the demolition is scheduled for tomorrow. Contracts are signed. Contracts can be amended, Marcus said simply. I spent 40 years in construction and development. Trust me, nothing is ever set in stone until the wrecking ball swings. Victoria sipped her coffee, buying time to think. Why show this to me? Why not approach Reynolds directly? Diana and Marcus exchanged glances. Because we've seen your other work, Diana said. The community center in Millwood, the library renovation downtown. Before you joined Reynolds, your designs honored existing communities rather than displacing them. Victoria felt a pang of recognition. Those earlier projects had been passion-driven, before the pressure of advancement had narrowed her focus to whatever would impress Reynolds and his wealthy clients. And, Marcus added quietly, because you listened this morning. You saw the value in what most people would dismiss as just an old building. Victoria stood and walked to the window, looking out at the neighborhood modest homes well-maintained by people who cared, small businesses with hand-painted signs, children playing in the afternoon sun. This wasn't a neighborhood that needed revitalization through gentrification. It needed investment in what was already there. If I brought this to Reynolds, she said slowly, he'd never agree. The potential profits from luxury condos far outweigh what his investors would make from a community-centered project. Oh, don't bring it to Reynolds, Diana suggested. Bring it directly to the investors. Some of them might care about more than just maximum returns. Victoria turned back to them. You're asking me to risk my partnership. Marcus met her gaze steadily. I'm asking you to remember why you became an architect in the first place. Was it to build monuments to wealth or to create spaces that serve people's needs? The question struck at something fundamental Victoria had been avoiding for years. Her phone buzzed another meeting reminder, reality intruding. I need to go, she said, gathering her things. I'll think about what you've shown me. That's all we ask, Marcus said, walking her to the door. Oh, and we're organizing a community gathering at the building tonight, just neighbors sharing memories, saying goodbye. You're welcome to join us. Victoria nodded noncommittally and left, her mind churning with conflicting thoughts all the way back to her office. You came, he said warmly. Come, let me introduce you to some folks. Over the next hour, Victoria was guided through a living history of the neighborhood. She met Mr. Townsend, 92 years old, who recalled getting his first haircut in the Harrington Building's barbershop in 1940. Mrs. Jenkins showed Victoria photos of her mother's seamstress shop that had occupied a corner space for 30 years. A middle-aged man named Lamont explained how the free legal clinic on the second floor had helped his family avoid eviction during hard times in the 1970s. This building was never just a building, an elderly woman named Esther told her, clasping Victoria's hand in her own gnarled fingers. It was our sanctuary when the rest of the city told us we weren't welcome. As twilight deepened into evening, someone set up an old projector, displaying historical photos of the building and neighborhood onto one of the brick walls. Children played tag around the adults while elders sat in chairs, pointing out faces in the projected images and sharing stories. Victoria found Diana standing slightly apart, documenting the gathering with a professional camera. I didn't expect so many people, Victoria admitted. Diana nodded. Word spread quickly once people heard about the demolition timeline. Many of them didn't know it was happening tomorrow. The proper notifications were posted, Victoria said, though the defense sounded hollow even to her own ears. Legal requirements and ethical ones aren't always the same, Diana replied, not unkindly. These people aren't just losing a building, they're losing a physical connection to their history, their ancestors' struggles and triumphs. The evening progressed, and Victoria found herself drawn into conversations, genuinely interested in the stories being shared. Around 8 o'clock, Marcus tapped on a microphone, calling for everyone's attention. Friends and neighbors, he began, his voice carrying across the now hushed crowd. Thank you all for coming tonight to honor this place that has meant so much to so many of us. Tomorrow morning at 9, they plan to begin demolition. A murmur of distress rippled through the gathering. I know, Marcus continued. It seems like there's nothing we can do, The city has approved it, the developers have their permits, the new owners have their rights. He paused, looking directly at Victoria where she stood at the edge of the crowd. But sometimes, when we come together, we can change the course of events. Sometimes, all it takes is for the right people to truly see us, our history, our community, our worth. Victoria felt the weight of his gaze, of all their gazes following his. She hadn't come here to be put on the spot, yet she couldn't deny the impact the day's revelations had had on her. "I'd like to introduce someone," Marcus continued. "This is Victoria Pierce, the architect who designed what's supposed to replace our building. She's been kind enough to join us tonight to listen to our stories. Ms. Pierce, would you like to say a few words?" Victoria froze. Public speaking was part of her job, but this was different. These weren't clients or colleagues. These were people whose lives would be directly affected by her design, people whose history she had been hired to literally demolish. Slowly, she made her way to where Marcus stood. Taking the microphone with slightly trembling hands, she looked out at the expectant faces. She began, then stopped, gathering her thoughts. "I want to thank you all for sharing your stories with me tonight. When I first designed the new development, I saw only an old, condemned building on valuable land. I didn't see the history, the community, or the meaning these walls hold for all of you." She took a deep breath. "I can't make promises about stopping the demolition. The decision isn't mine alone to make. But I can promise that I'll spend tonight reviewing everything I've learned today and exploring every possible alternative." A cautious murmur of hope moved through the crowd. "Whatever happens tomorrow," Victoria concluded, "I want you to know that I've heard you. Your stories matter, this building matters, and sometimes," she glanced at Marcus, "sometimes the right people just need to truly see." She handed the microphone back amidst scattered applause. As the gathering continued, Victoria slipped away, her mind made up. She had work to do and only one night to do it. Back at her apartment, Victoria spread out all the materials Diana had given her across her dining table. She pulled up the original plans for the Harrington building, which she'd accessed for the demolition preparation, and compared them with Diana's restoration proposals. She researched preservation grants and verified the tax incentives Diana had mentioned. By 2 in the morning, she had created rough sketches of an alternative design, one that preserved the historical facade and internal features like the grand staircase and third-floor library, while modernizing the infrastructure and repurposing the spaces for community use. She ran financial projections that incorporated the community trust funds, grants, and reduced, but still reasonable investor returns. At 3, she emailed her findings to several of the more socially conscious investors on the project, people who had previously expressed interest in community impact alongside profits. She explained the historical significance they'd overlooked, the viable alternative approach, and the potential public relations benefits of preservation over demolition. By 5, 2 investors had responded with interest. By 6, she had scheduled an emergency meeting at 7:30, 90 minutes before demolition was set to begin. Victoria grabbed 2 hours of restless sleep before showering and dressing with particular care. Today would either mark a turning point in her career or its effective end at Reynolds and Associates. At 7:30 sharp, she met with 3 key investors at a coffee shop near the Harrington building. Reynolds was conspicuously absent. Victoria hadn't invited him, knowing he would shut down the discussion before it began. "This is highly irregular, Victoria," said Alina Blackwood, the investment group's most senior member. "Changing course literally hours before demolition." "I understand the timing is far from ideal," Victoria acknowledged. "But new information has come to light that materially affects both the ethical and financial dimensions of this project." She laid out everything: the building's historical significance, the active community investment, the restoration grants available, and her alternative design that would preserve history while still providing a return on investment. "The projected returns are lower," noted Michael Chen, another investor, "but not insignificantly so, especially with the tax incentives. And the community goodwill is valuable," added Darius Williams, the youngest of the investment team. "Especially in today's climate where ethical development is increasingly scrutinized." Alina studied the numbers carefully. "Reynolds won't like this. He's got his heart set on those luxury condos." "Reynolds doesn't have to like it," Victoria replied evenly. "He's not the one investing $20 million in this project. You are." The 3 investors exchanged glances. "I need to make some calls," Alina said finally. "Can you delay the demolition crew for an hour?" Victoria checked her watch. It was already 8:15. "I'll try." She rushed to the Harrington building where the demolition team was already setting up. To her surprise, a small crowd had gathered, some of the same community members from last night, now holding hastily made signs protesting the demolition. Marcus stood among them, leaning on his cane. When he saw Victoria approaching, hope flashed across his face. "Any news?" he asked quietly. "Possibly," Victoria replied. "I need to buy some time." She approached the construction foreman, explaining that there was a potential change in plans and requesting a 1-hour delay. The man was unsympathetic. "Lady, I got a schedule to keep. Unless I get a direct order from Reynolds or the city, we're proceeding as planned." Victoria tried calling the investors but got no answer. The demolition preparations continued, with the wrecking ball being moved into position. The crowd of protesters grew, their chants becoming louder. Police arrived to maintain order. At 8:45, Victoria received a text from a leaner. "Still working on it, need more time." Victoria stared at the message, then at the demolition equipment, then at the growing crowd of community members. She made a split-second decision that could end her career. She walked directly to the building entrance and positioned herself in front of the door. Several community members, seeing her action, moved to join her. "What are you doing?" the foreman demanded. "Protecting a historical landmark until we receive official confirmation on its status," Victoria replied, projecting confidence she didn't entirely feel. The foreman scoffed. "It's not a landmark. Move aside or I'll have the police remove you." More community members joined the human chain forming around the building. Marcus took position beside Victoria, giving her an approving nod. "You're risking a lot," he observed. "So did Samuel Harrington when he built this place," Victoria replied. Minutes ticked by. The police spoke with the foreman, then approached the protesters, advising them to disperse. Victoria's phone rang. It was James Reynolds. "What the hell do you think you're doing?" he demanded without preamble. "The investors just called an emergency meeting without me, and now I hear you're part of some protest." "I'm protecting our client's investment while they reconsider the best approach for this property," Victoria answered calmly. "This is career suicide, Victoria. That partnership you've worked toward for years, forget it." "Perhaps," she admitted, "but I'm doing what's right for the community and potentially for our investors too." Reynolds hung up abruptly. Victoria's stomach knotted with anxiety, but she held her ground. At 8:55, just 5 minutes before demolition was scheduled to begin, a black town car pulled up. Eleanor Blackwood emerged, followed by the other investors. They approached the foreman, who listened intently before nodding and making a call on his radio. The wrecking ball swung toward the crumbling facade of the Harrington building, its pendulous weight casting a shadow over the crowd gathered below. Marcus Johnson, 65 years old with salt and pepper hair and determination etched into the lines of his face, stood directly in its path, arms outstretched as if he could physically hold back progress with nothing but will. "Stop!" Marcus shouted, his voice cracking with emotion. "This building isn't just brick and mortar, it's our history." Behind him, nearly 200 community members linked arms, creating a human chain around the perimeter of the century-old structure. Their chants rose in unified defiance against the demolition crew. Police officers shifted uncomfortably, unsure whether to intervene. The construction foreman shouted into his radio while glaring at the unexpected resistance. Standing across the street, Victoria Pierce, the architect whose design was supposed to replace this eyesore with luxury condominiums, clutched her portfolio to her chest. Her carefully crafted plans, the ones that had finally earned her partner status at Reynolds and Associates, were literally crumbling before her eyes. "Ms. Pierce," her assistant whispered urgently, "Mr. Reynolds is on the phone. He's furious. He says if you can't handle this situation immediately, the promotion is off the table." Victoria's phone buzzed with incoming calls from investors, each one representing millions of dollars now in jeopardy. Through the chaos, her eyes locked with Marcus's across the divide, his filled with righteous passion, hers with professional panic. Between them hung the question of what truly constituted progress and at what cost it should come. And then something unexpected happened. The wrecking ball stopped its arc, hovering in midair. Eleanor Blackwood stepped forward, her authoritative presence creating an immediate hush over the crowd. "As the primary investor in this project," she announced in a voice accustomed to boardrooms, "I am officially halting this demolition pending further review." A cheer erupted from the protesters. Marcus lowered his arms, a look of cautious hope replacing defiance. Eleanor continued, "Ms. Pierce has brought to our attention significant historical and community factors that warrant reconsideration of our approach. We will be exploring a preservation-based alternative that honors this building's legacy while still meeting our development goals." Victoria felt lightheaded with relief. She hadn't expected such a definitive statement from Eleanor, who was usually the most conservative of the investors. The demolition crew began standing down, packing up their equipment amid the celebrating crowd. Victoria made her way through the throng to where Alina stood with the other investors. "Thank you," she said simply. Alina gave her an appraising look. "Don't thank me yet. Reynolds is livid, and this project just became considerably more complicated. But—" She glanced at the joyful community members, some of them embracing, others wiping away tears. Sometimes the right investment isn't just about the money. Over the coming weeks, Victoria worked closely with Diana Johnson to refine the preservation and repurposing plan. They formed a committee that included community representatives, preservation experts, and the investment team. Reynolds, after initially threatening to fire Victoria, reluctantly came around when he saw the positive press coverage and potential for a new market niche in historical preservation. 6 months later, restoration work on the Harrington Building was well underway. The mural Victoria had discovered on her first visit had been carefully preserved and would become the centerpiece of a small museum area documenting the building's significance. The grand staircase was being painstakingly restored, and the third-floor library would once again be filled with books, this time as part of a community education center. On a crisp autumn morning, Victoria stood on the sidewalk, watching workers carefully reinstall the original Harrington Building sign above the entrance. Marcus joined her, both of them admiring the progress. "You know," Marcus said, "when I first saw you that morning, I thought you were just another developer who couldn't see past dollar signs." Victoria smiled ruefully. "You weren't entirely wrong. I'd become so focused on success that I'd forgotten why I became an architect, to create spaces that matter, that serve people's needs." "Well, you certainly remembered in time," Marcus replied. "This building will serve generations to come, just as it served generations past." They watched as Diana directed a group of architecture students who were documenting the restoration process. Several local businesses had already applied for spaces in the renovated ground floor, and a health clinic had committed to opening in one of the second-floor suites. "Reynolds offered me that partnership," Victoria said suddenly. "Not for this project, but for bringing in a new historical preservation division. Turns out there's considerable demand for architects who can balance progress with legacy." "Congratulations," Marcus said sincerely, "though I'm not surprised. You found a way for everyone to win: the investors, the community, the city." "Not everyone," Victoria admitted. "Some of the luxury condo buyers were disappointed," Marcus chuckled. "They'll find other places to live, but this community, this was their only Harrington Building." As they spoke, Alina Blackwood's town car pulled up. She emerged with several other well-dressed individuals, potential investors for similar projects in other neighborhoods. "Victoria," Alina called, "come meet our new partners. They're very interested in your approach to community-centered development." As Victoria moved to join them, Marcus smiled to himself. Sometimes the right people just needed to truly see, and Victoria Pierce had not only seen but had found the courage to act on what she saw. The Harrington Building stood as testament to that courage, its brick facade scrubbed clean, its windows unboarded, ready to begin its second century as the heart of a community that had refused to let its history be erased. 1 year later, on a warm summer evening, hundreds of community members gathered in front of the fully restored Harrington Building for its grand reopening. The facade gleamed in the setting sun, every brick and cornice restored to its original glory. New energy-efficient windows filled the once boarded openings, and the original sign had been refinished and illuminated. Victoria stood to the side of the temporary stage that had been set up for the occasion, watching as Marcus Johnson approached the microphone. At 76, he moved a little more slowly now, but his voice remained strong and clear. "Friends, neighbors, honored guests," he began. "Today we celebrate not just the reopening of a building, but the reaffirmation of our community's resilience. The Harrington Building has stood on this corner for a century, and thanks to all of you and some unexpected allies, it will stand for at least another 100 years. Applause rippled through the crowd. Victoria spotted familiar faces, Alina Blackwood and the other investors, now proud supporters of historical preservation. Diana Johnson, who had become a close friend and occasional collaborator. Even James Reynolds, who had eventually recognized the marketing value of ethical development, and now prominently featured the Harrington restoration in company brochures. "I want to acknowledge someone special," Marcus continued. "Someone who could have simply followed the established plan, but instead chose to listen, to learn, and ultimately to stand with us when it mattered most. Victoria Pierce, would you join me? Surprised, Victoria made her way to the stage amid enthusiastic applause. Marcus embraced her warmly before turning back to the microphone. A year ago, Ms. Pierce was tasked with replacing this building. Today, she stands as the architect who helped save it. That kind of courage, to change course when you recognize a better path, is rare and valuable. He gestured to the building behind them. Inside these walls, you'll now find Black-owned businesses once again serving our community. You'll find a health clinic providing affordable care, legal services for those who need them, and educational programs for our youth. The third floor, once home to Samuel Harrington's community library, now houses the most comprehensive collection of African-American literature and historical documents in the city. Victoria stepped to the microphone. "The credit belongs to all of you," she said, looking out at the gathered community. "Your stories, your memories, your refusal to let this landmark disappear, that's what saved the Harrington building. I merely helped translate your vision into architectural reality." She paused, emotion catching in her throat. "Working on this project has transformed my understanding of what architecture can and should be. Buildings aren't just structures, they're repositories of history, containers of community, physical manifestations of our values. The Harrington building now stands as proof that progress doesn't have to erase the past. It can build upon it instead." After the ceremony, as people filed into the building for tour and refreshments, Victoria found herself standing with Marcus and Diana in the main entrance hall. The restored mural gleamed on the wall, now protected behind museum-quality glass and properly lit to highlight its details. "Did you ever imagine a year ago that we'd be standing here like this?" Diana asked. Victoria shook her head. "Never. I was so certain of my path partner at Reynolds, designing luxury spaces for the wealthy, climbing that particular ladder of success." "And now," Marcus prompted. "Now I'm launching my own firm," Victoria revealed. "Community-centered design with a focus on historical preservation and adaptive reuse. Elinor is one of my primary investors." "That's wonderful news," Diana exclaimed. "Any projects lined up yet?" Victoria smiled. "Actually, yes. 3 other neighborhoods have approached me about buildings with historical significance that are at risk of demolition. It seems the Harrington project has inspired others to fight for their community landmarks." Marcus nodded approvingly. "Samuel Harrington built this place because he saw a need that wasn't being met. Sounds like you're following a similar path." Around them, the building hummed with life, children exploring the new library, elders sharing memories in the community room, young entrepreneurs touring the affordable retail spaces. What had once been slated for destruction was now a vibrant hub once again. As evening deepened into night, Victoria found herself alone in the third-floor library. Moonlight streamed through the tall windows, illuminating the newly installed bookshelves stocked with volumes on African-American history, literature, and culture. A special collection housed Samuel Harrington's personal papers and photographs, donated by descendants who had come forward during the restoration process. Victoria ran her hand along the smooth wooden railing of the grand staircase, the same gesture Marcus had made on that fateful morning a year ago. The building seemed to respond to her touch, creaking gently as if acknowledging her presence. In saving this structure, Victoria had also saved something within herself, the idealism that had led her to architecture in the first place, the belief that spaces could serve greater purposes than mere profit or prestige. The Harrington building stood as testament not just to a community's history, but to the possibility of change, of course correction, of finding better ways forward without erasing what came before. Outside, the city continued its relentless evolution. New buildings rose and old ones fell. But here, in this sanctuary of memory and purpose, past and future had found a way to coexist, to complement rather than compete. It wasn't just a building that had been preserved, but a philosophy, one that valued continuity over replacement, community over commodity, meaning over mere progress. Victoria smiled to herself as she prepared to leave, turning off the lights and taking one last look at the moonlit library. Whatever challenges tomorrow might bring, tonight had affirmed that some things were worth fighting for, worth preserving. And sometimes, the most meaningful architecture wasn't about creating something new, but about helping what already existed find new ways to serve, to inspire, to endure. Thank you for listening. If this story touched you, please subscribe and share your thoughts in the comments.